Some say justice rides fast. Others say she wears a bonnet and don't speak much. Both were right about Ruth Calder. It was the summer of the long drought, when dust clung to skin like guilt, and even the coyotes barked less. Ruth lived alone on the edge of Pine Hollow, a pocket of hard land nestled beneath the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. Her ranch wasn't much, 3 acres of sunburnt earth, a lopsided barn, and a corral with a single, jet-black Mustang named Whistle. She trained horses for cavalry outfits and rarely came into town unless there was need. Folks didn't mind. They called her Widow Calder when they thought she couldn't hear. She'd once been Ruth Emerson, daughter of a Vermont stonemason, full of fire and poetry. That was before the war took her brothers, and the West took her heart. Her husband, Jonah Calder, came home from the Union Army with half a leg and twice the scars, but never once complained. They'd carved out their patch of earth together. Then, 5 winters back, he died of fever in her arms. She didn't remarry, didn't weep long. Just kept going, kept training, kept feeding the land. That Tuesday, she rode Whistle into town before the sun burned off the fog. She needed salt, rifle cartridges, and flour. Town hadn't changed. A single muddy street, a saloon with more splinters than customers, and a sheriff who kept his badge shiny but his morals dull. The general store was near empty when she entered. Old Elias, behind the counter, gave her a nod, then stared back at his ledger like he feared what her eyes might say. "You hear something?" Ruth asked, her voice even, quiet. "Maybe," Elias replied. "Delgado boys came through late last night. Tore up McAllister's stable. Took a mare. Sheriff ain't stirred." She didn't answer, just handed over her coin, packed her goods in a feed sack, and turned to leave. That's when she heard it, the unmistakable whistle. Not a man's call, but Whistle's. Her Mustang only did that once, when startled. She stepped onto the porch in time to see the last of them. For men on horses, dust trails behind them like smoke from a bad fire. The lead rider sat on Whistle's back, laughing as the stallion bucked and fought his grip. The Mustang's hooves tore up the dirt, but the outlaw dug in spurs, jerked the reins hard. Ruth felt something cold settle in her bones. Sheriff Langford leaned against the jailhouse door, arms crossed. He met her eyes, then looked away. A man who'd already made his decision. Ruth walked down the steps slowly, like her boots weighed double. No one stopped her. No one said a word. When she reached the empty hitching post, she ran a hand over the grooves where Whistle's lead rope had been tied. Then she picked up her sack of supplies, slung it over her shoulder, and started walking home. Her wagon was overturned a block down, half crushed under a drunk stray bullet. She didn't bother with it. She arrived at dusk, dust clinging to her dress, lips cracked, eyes unblinking. Inside the barn, she set down her sack, pulled off her boots, and lit a single oil lamp. The shadows jumped like ghosts on the walls. From the rafters, she took down an old wooden box. Inside lay a Henry rifle wrapped in oilcloth, a hunting knife with a bone handle, and a leather belt with 6 brass cartridges. She sat on a crate and unwrapped each item like she was preparing a funeral. Outside, a dry wind picked up. The corral gate swung open and shut, open and shut. The stall where Whistle once stood was now bare. She sharpened the knife until it hissed on the stone. Her hands didn't shake. They moved with the same calm that once stitched her husband's wounds in the middle of a skirmish. The same hands that broke wild horses without breaking their spirit. Before midnight, she stood outside again, staring at the horizon. Somewhere out there, 4 men rode with her horse. Somewhere, they thought they had taken something small, a piece of property, a show of power. What they didn't know was this. Whistle wasn't just a Mustang. He was the last thing Ruth Calder loved. And they had stolen him. She turned toward the barn, lantern in hand, and disappeared into the dark. The night air closed behind her like the lid of a coffin. Ruth left before the sun dared show its face. She wore Jonah's old duster, a faded navy coat that still smelled of tobacco and sweat. Her boots were patched, but her steps were steady. Across her back was the Henry rifle, cleaned and loaded. A leather satchel bounced against her hip, filled with jerky, water, and 3 feet of coiled wire. She didn't saddle another horse. She walked. Horses could be tracked, but feet left lighter ghosts in the dust. The land east of Pine Hollow was cruel and silent. Red rock canyons split the desert floor like old scars, and thornbrush clung to every rise. Ruth knew this land, knew where the snakes curled under stone at noon, where the rabbits dashed when the hawk soared. She'd spent years mapping it in silence, a landscape measured by grief and grit. By midday, she found the Delgado gang's trail. It was easy, deep, careless prints from 4 horses, one heavier than the rest. Whistle. She knelt beside the tracks, ran her fingers through the disturbed sand. A drop of blood dotted the earth. Not Whistle's. Spurred too hard. They don't deserve you, she muttered. She pressed on. In the afternoon, a dust devil spun across the plain like a drunken spirit. Ruth turned her face away, eyes squinted against the grit. When it passed, she spotted a rider in the distance. Not a Delgado, too thin, too slow. Just a peddler's son on a mule, trying to find shade. He saw her and raised a hand. She didn't wave back. By sundown, she reached the stone arches, 2 leaning spires of sandstone that marked the border between lawless land and outlaw country. Folks called it Dead Mare's Pass. Beyond that point, there were no sheriffs, no courts, just rifles and reckonings. She camped beneath the arches, fireless, chewing cold meat and watching stars blink awake in the sky. Coyotes howled to the west. She didn't sleep. Her hand rested on the rifle, and her mind replayed the theft again and again. Whistle bucking, the outlaw laughing, the sheriff looking away. In the morning, she moved like a ghost, sticking to the canyon walls. She covered her rifle in a cloth to keep the sun from glinting off it. Every so often, she knelt and studied the trail. The gang had split briefly near a dry creek. 2 veered west, 2 north. She followed the western path, trusting instinct. Whistle would fight any hand that didn't know his ways. The rider would want him broken before sunrise. By the second day, Ruth found their tracks led to an old trading post, a shack built into the rock, long abandoned except for a windmill that creaked like a warning. Smoke rose from a barrel out back. Someone was there. She crouched behind a juniper bush, watching. One man, lean and lanky, came out to piss near a pile of split firewood. He had a revolver tucked into his belt, but it swung loose, lazy. He wasn't a fighter. He was a talker. Ruth waited until he went inside again, then circled wide and came down the slope with the wind at her back. She entered quiet, knife in hand. The door creaked, but only once. Inside, the man sat by a fire pit, sipping from a tin mug. His boots were off, his eyes half shut. He didn't hear her until the blade kissed the back of his neck. "Speak loud, die quick," she said, voice low. He froze. "Where's Whistle?" she asked. "Lady, The blade pressed firmer. "The black Mustang." "Where?" He swallowed. "Vic and Jero rode north. Took the horse. Said they's headin' to Rattlesnake Hollow to meet the rest. Big cave there. Stashes and such. I was just restin' here, I swear." She took a step back, letting him turn. His hands were up. Young. Maybe 20. Mouthful of lies and teeth too clean for an outlaw. "You know what happens to men who ride what don't belong to them?" she asked. He shook his head, trembling. "They get unseated." She pistol-whipped him across the jaw. He crumpled like dry cloth. She tied him to the windmill post, gagged and facing east. If he was lucky, someone would find him. If not, the sun would finish what she started. Rattlesnake Hollow was a half-day's walk. Ruth knew the path, though she hadn't taken it in years. Not since she and Jonah had hunted a wounded mountain lion through those same canyons. Back then, she'd carried a smaller rifle and leaned on him when the night turned too cold. Now she carried everything alone. By afternoon, she reached the rim of the hollow. It was deep and wide, shaped like a bowl carved by angry gods. Scrub brush littered the floor, and dark caves yawned open on the far wall. Smoke drifted from one. Ruth laid flat against the ridge, pulled out a spyglass Jonah had left her, and watched. 3 men lounged near the fire. One cleaned a rifle. Another sharpened a Bowie knife on a leather strap. The third, bigger than the others, walked a circle around the cave, checking shadows. No Whistle in sight, but hoof prints lined the dirt, fresh, deep. He was here. Ruth waited until nightfall. She didn't move. Her breath slowed. Her hands, once stitched with age, grew steady with purpose. When darkness swallowed the canyon, she backed away from the ridge and found a small overhang to sleep under. She needed rest. The fight was coming. As she closed her eyes, the wind picked up again, carrying dust and distant laughter from below. The Delgados thought they were safe, hidden in a fold of rock with stolen fire and stolen beasts. They didn't know Ruth Calder had found them. Not yet, but they would. Ruth waited until the stars dimmed and the black of night turned gray. The hollow still slept. No firelight danced, no voices rose. It was the hour when even devils rest, and that was when she moved. She descended the ridge in silence, boots finding rock and root without pause. Her rifle was strapped across her back, her knife in hand. Around her waist, a length of wire coiled like a serpent, ready to bite. She didn't hurry. Revenge served best when eaten cold, and she'd been cold for years. The mouth of the cave loomed ahead. A few yards from it, a figure sat slumped against a boulder, chin on chest. As she neared, Ruth could see the faint rise and fall of breath. Asleep. She crouched and studied his face, round, pocked with dust, and a mustache thin as a lie. Jairo, one of the Delgado lieutenants. She remembered his name from town gossip. Quick with a knife, quicker to run. She uncoiled her wire and moved behind him, looped it gently around his throat, then pulled tight and fast. He woke with a strangled gasp, feet kicking. It was over in seconds. She eased his body to the dirt and dragged it behind the boulder. No gunfire, no shouts, just the wind whispering approval through the rocks. Inside the cave, the scent of sweat, horses, and old fire hit her like a wave. She adjusted her eyes to the dark. Farther in, she saw flickers of movement, shadows against the stone. A lantern burned near the back, casting long, trembling lines. She crept forward. Whistle was tied just beside the light, restless, eyes wild. His hide twitched at every sound. She locked eyes with him. He stilled, just for a heartbeat. He knew her. "Easy, boy," she whispered. Behind the lantern, two men argued over something spread on a crate. Maps, coins, bullets. "Should V taken the damn horse?" One said. "He's more trouble than he's worth. Kick me twice." Vic Ruth recognized his voice. He was the one who'd spurred Whistle in town, the one who laughed like cruelty was a sport. The other man grunted. "We move east by dawn. Hit Bramble Fork, then split. She ain't following us this far." They both laughed. Ruth stepped from the shadows, rifle raised. "She's already here." They spun. Vic went for his gun, but Ruth shot first. The bullet slammed into his thigh, sending him sprawling backward with a scream. The other outlaw lunged for cover, but she shot again, clipped his shoulder. He dropped behind a crate, cursing. Ruth moved fast, grabbed Whistle's reins with one hand, and dragged him toward the cave mouth. He resisted at first, then, realizing who held him, followed. A shot cracked behind her. Stone shattered near her head. Another barked out, missing her ribs by inches. She dove behind a rock outcrop at the cave's edge and pulled Whistle with her. The Mustang snorted, furious, but alive. Inside, Vic shouted, "You're dead, lady. You hear me? You come into my cave. You don't walk out." "You're wrong on both counts," Ruth muttered. She pulled her last cartridge from the belt and loaded it. 2 bullets left. The wounded outlaw crawled toward the lantern. His hand reached for it. Ruth aimed and fired. The lantern shattered, fire licking across spilled oil. The cave filled with smoke and dancing flames. Vic screamed in rage, the fire lighting his face in flickering horror. He charged blind into the smoke, revolver drawn. Ruth ducked, let him pass, then rose and slammed her rifle, but into his back. He fell hard. Before he could rise, she knelt on his spine, yanked his head back, and whispered into his ear, "You ever ride another woman's horse again, you best ride into hell." Then she struck him again, and he went still. The fire spread quick, devouring crates and maps and blankets. The last outlaw limped from the smoke, eyes wild. He raised his weapon, trembling. Whistle charged. The Mustang reared and brought both front hooves down on the man's chest. Bones cracked. The gun clattered away. Ruth stood in the smoke, rifle low, firelight painting her like a spirit out of myth. Behind her, the cave collapsed into embers. She walked to Whistle, pressed her forehead to his. "You're all right now." He nickered low, and for the first time in days, her breath came easy. She tied Vic and the other one, still breathing, to the remains of a wagon axle outside. She scrawled a note on torn cloth and pinned it to Vic's chest. Stole a horse. Lost everything else. Ruth Calder. By mid-morning, she was riding north with Whistle beneath her. The air smelled of ash and justice. The sun rose slow, warm on her back. In Pine Hollow, Sheriff Langford nursed coffee and stared down a slow, hot day. When the town's telegraph operator ran down the street waving smoke-singed cloth, Langford read the message once, twice. Then he swallowed hard and sat back down. He wouldn't send a posse. He wouldn't lift a finger. Some things in the West rode outside the law. Some things rode above it. Ruth didn't return to town that week, or the next, but her legend did. They said she came back with a rifle scorched black and a horse that no man could ride. Said she left 2 outlaws in a hollow too ashamed to speak her name, and a fire so fierce the rocks themselves wept. They said she walked through fire and didn't burn, and if you ride too hard past Dead Mare's Pass, you can still hear hooves echoing off the stone, hooves of a Mustang, followed by a woman who takes grit, guns, and glory from any man foolish enough to take what's hers. They whispered her name long after she'd gone. Ruth Calder, the widow of Pine Hollow, the one who rode into outlaw country and came back with fire on her boots and no mercy left in her heart. But Ruth never looked for stories. She looked for silence. 3 weeks after the fall of the Delgados, she rode south along the canyon rim, her figure small against the vast stretch of desert. Whistle's hooves moved with quiet rhythm, light as if he, too, had learned to avoid stirring the dust too much. They left no trail. She avoided towns. Pine Hollow had become too loud with questions and the kinds of glances she didn't care to return. The blacksmith tipped his hat in awe now instead of greeting her with casual warmth. The schoolteacher stared at her rifle before her eyes. And the sheriff, Langford, he offered her coffee one morning and told her he'd cleared the bounty on Vic Delgado's head, handed her a bundle of cash she hadn't asked for. She left it on his desk. Money was for the living. She rode for something else. She drifted from ranch to ranch, offering help where it was needed. Fences mended, wolves driven off. A stubborn well dug out with blistered hands, and the stubborn force of someone who didn't expect reward. Most of the time, folks didn't recognize her until the work was nearly done. "That Ruth Calder?" They'd whisper when she rode away, and someone would nod adding, "She don't say much, but she leaves things better than she found him." Still, the quiet never quite settled in her bones. She slept with her rifle across her chest, and dreamed of fire in the caves and Whistle's scream when they first dragged him from her. Some wounds didn't scar over. They just stayed open wide enough to keep you walking. In the high hills above Mesa Dry, she met a girl with a limp and a shotgun too big for her hands. Bandits had burned her family's farm, stolen her father's cattle, left her mother weeping in the ashes. Ruth found the girl setting traps in the canyon passes, waiting for revenge she hadn't yet learned how to take. "Traps are good," Ruth said, kneeling beside her. "But rage without aim's just another wildfire." The girl looked at her, squinting. "You talk like you know something." Ruth handed her a coil of wire. "I do." They waited together that night. When the raiders came back, Ruth taught her how to shoot for the legs first, make 'em crawl before they beg. The girl didn't hesitate. When it was done, Ruth didn't stay. She left the girl with her name, a knife, and a new kind of silence. Word spread again. Now they called her the widow who rode alone. Said she drifted where justice had dried up, where the law had given up, and where women stood alone in their doorways with fire behind their eyes. They said if you hung a stolen saddle over your porch, she'd ride past in the night and take it. And maybe you too. Ruth never listened to the stories. She only listened to the wind. One evening, as the sun bled into the sand behind her, she reached a valley ringed by red cliffs. It was untouched by roads or rail, just tall grass, sagebrush, and the quiet hum of bees. There was a spring trickling down the stones, and a stand of cottonwoods shivering in the breeze. She stopped. Whistle snorted. "Looks like rest," she murmured. She pitched a tent of canvas and staked a small corral for Whistle. She lit no fires, left no markers, just the land, the horse, and the space between. A week passed. Then another. One morning, she rose and didn't saddle the horse. She stood on the ridge and stared at the horizon. The sun touched her skin like a memory. She thought of Jonah, how he'd laughed when storms rolled in, how he used to say the West didn't know them anything. But maybe, just maybe, it had room for two more hearts that wouldn't quit. "I found my place," she whispered. Whistle walked up beside her and waited. She didn't go back to the towns. She didn't need to. The stories would do the walking for her now. Some said she died in that hidden valley, old and alone, buried beneath the cottonwoods, with a rifle over her chest and her boots on. Others claimed she never aged, that she still rides, still watches, still finds the men who take what isn't theirs and leaves them with lessons carved into bone. But if you ask the girl in Mesa Dry, or the blacksmith in Pine Hollow, or the sheriff with that scorched cloth pin behind his desk, they'll tell you the truth plain and clear. She wasn't looking to be a legend. She was just a widow with a good horse, a long memory, and no patience left for thieves. And she rode alone because none could follow where justice had already passed.